Volume 3, Chapter 3 of The Vicar of Wrexhill. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. The Vicar of Wrexhill by Francis Milton Trollope. Volume 3, Chapter 3. Charles's interview with his stepfather. His sudden departure from Wrexhill. There were, moreover, other ladies to be encountered, most of whom, as the vicar well knew, would not hear of his brilliant nuptials with pleasure. But this was a matter of small moment. The benevolent attentions he had bestowed upon them were chiefly for the purpose of ensuring popularity and acquiring influence, and those were now too much at his command for him to experience the slightest anxiety from the fear of losing them. The remembrance of the three Mrs. Richards was indeed rather heavy upon him, especially from the circumstance of Miss Mary's having accidentally seen him kiss Miss Louisa, which he happened to do in the little shrubbery behind their cottage, upon occasion of a serious discourse which they had been holding together upon the nature and influence of especial grace. Little Mary, who was purity and simplicity personified, firmly believed in her very innocent heart that this caress could only be given by such a gentleman as Mr. Cartwright as the ratification of a treaty of marriage, and had accordingly not only alluded to Louisa's happy prospects herself, but had fully persuaded her sister Charlotte likewise to believe that this blessed union would be the result of the vicar's soft attentions to them all. So that upon a smart discussion with their mother upon the sin of works, when matters had gone so far as to induce the young lady to declare that she considered the door of her mother's house as nothing less than a type of the gates of hell, she had, in relating the scene of this praiseworthy combat to their apostle, ventured these remarkable words: "There is sorrow and sin in dwelling under the roof of the scorner. But when dear Louisa has quite consented to all your wishes, Mr. Cartwright, her bowels will yearn towards her sisters, and you will both of you draw us out of the way of temptation, under the shelter and the shadow of your wing." The only reply which the vicar made to this speech was the utterance of a fervent blessing. He now remembered with considerable satisfaction the cautious tendency of this reply, and upon the whole thought that there was no occasion to fatigue his spirits by making these young ladies a private visit to announce his change of condition, as in the case of Mrs. Simpson. He therefore turned from the widow's door, after the pause of a moment on her threshold, during which these thoughts were rapidly but healthily digested, leaving him, that is to say, neither loaded with remorse nor fevered by anxiety. Upon this occasion, for some reason or other, connected perhaps with that tranquillity of mind in his lady which it was so unquestionably his duty to guard, the Vicar of Wrexhill had not made use of his carriage and servants. He walked, therefore, back to the park, and met Charles Mowbray coming through the lodge gates as he entered them. The young man touched his hat and was walking on, but the vicar stopped him. "Where are you going, my dear Charles?" said he. "It is getting quite late. You will not have time for a walk before dinner. It is almost dark. You know my habits are those of great punctuality." "I shall never interfere with those habits, sir. It is probable that I may not return to dinner." "Indeed! We shall be very sorry to lose you. Where are you going, then, my dear boy?" Charles hesitated. His heart seemed to swell in his bosom at this questioning, and though, in fact, he had strolled out without any idea of absenting himself at dinner, something like a spirit of rebellion induced him to answer, "To Sir Gilbert Harrington's, sir." "Good evening, then. Let me bespeak your ear for half an hour in my library to morrow morning, between the hours of 11 and 12. Charles bowed, but uttered not a word, and proceeded towards Oakley, inwardly muttering, "His library." He entered the mansion of his old friends without an apology, but stated the cause of his visit as it really was. "I could not bear to be examined by him as to where I was going, and when I was coming, and rather to prove my independence than for any other reason, I am come to you. Can you forgive this?" "Ay, truly we can," replied the old lady. "And be sure to do the same next time, Charles. It makes me sick to think of this species of paternal admonishing. I am to be lectured for my impatience under it, as I suspect, for he bade me meet him in his library to morrow morning." "His library! Scoundrel!" exclaimed Sir Gilbert through his closed teeth. "Shall I obey the mandate, Sir Gilbert?" said Charles, "or shall I take no notice of it?" "The question seems an easy one to answer, Charles," replied the baronet; "and had I been to answer yesterday morning, I should have said without hesitation, 'Set fire to the library, and stifle him in it like a weasel as he is, rather than come at his call.' But I have taken it into my head since that our test game will be to keep things soft and smooth for a while. So wait upon him, Master Charles, in your father's library, and hear all he has got to say, and don't turn yourself out of the house, and don't spit upon him if you can help it. But I hope he won't sit on poor Mowbray's chair." In consequence of this counsel, Charles did wait upon the vicar in his father's library at the appointed hour, and took what comfort he could from perceiving that he was not seated in that lamented father's chair, but had ensconced himself in a newly invented fauteuil of surprising softness. which he had caused to be brought from the drawing-room for his especial comfort. "You have not kept me waiting, and I commend you for it, my son. May He, in whom I trust, lead you in His own good time to be all that your pious mother can wish to see you. Sit down, Charles, pray sit down." Poor Charles! The whole scene was purgatory to him, but his courage did not forsake him, and instead of running out of the room, as he felt terribly tempted to do, he sat down opposite to his stepfather, determined to hear everything he had to say. "I think, Charles, that the pious nature of your mother, awakened as it has of late been, must by this time be so sufficiently known to you all as to prevent the possibility of your mistaking her motives for marrying the second father in whose presence you are now placed. Her motives have been of the holiest kind, and never probably did any person perform a more acceptable service than she did, when, placing her hand within mine before his altar, she resigned that power over her children, which maternal weakness rendered almost nugatory, to one who is too strong in the Lord to permit any human feelings or motives ever to make him swerve from that course which he is taught to believe the best. It would be a very shining pleasure to me, if your thankfulness for this most merciful dispensation were at this very moment to impel you to kneel down on one of those cushions. Of such there are always sufficient and to spare in the dwellings of the chosen. I wish, I say, that even now I could see you fall down before me to give thanks for having sent to you and your sisters one of his own, as your guide and protector through the pitfalls of this life, and to usher you with favour into his presence in the life to come. I would willingly see you thus grateful for manifest mercies, but I shall not insist upon it at this moment, for I know, Charles, how different have been the paths in which your teachers have hitherto led you." The vicar here paused, but as there was no point in his harangue to which Mowbray could have replied in the spirit which his friend had recommended to him, he resolutely kept silence. "The time will come," resumed the vicar, "the time shall come, when your knees, young man, shall be less stubborn. But it is time that I unfold to you the business upon which I wished to speak when I permitted your attendance in this apartment. You have been led, doubtless, by the active machinations of the devil, to turn your sinful thoughts towards that profession which, beyond all others, has made Satan its patron and its saint. In one word, you have thought of going into the army. And it is to inform you that I shall not permit this dreadful sin to be committed by one of my family, that you are now before me. Open not your mouth, young man, in defence of the God-abandoned set to whom you would wish to belong. My ears must not be profaned by any words of such abhorrent tendency. Instead of speaking yourself, hear me. My will is that you return to college, and there to prepare yourself for ordination. I utter this command with a conscience void of offence, for though your awful deficiency in religion is well known to me, I have confidence in the Lord, and in the power he will give me to work a change, and moreover, I know to what bishop I shall lead you for ordination, thereby securing to myself the consolation of knowing that no human learning will enable you to be received within the pale that we are strengthening around us, and within which none shall be admitted if we can help it, but the regenerate and adopted, or such as we of the evangelical church may choose to pledge ourselves shall become so. As to the manner and amount of your future income, I shall take the arrangement of it entirely into my own hands, reserving to myself the power of varying your allowance from time to time, as shall seem good. You may have a few days' holidays here, if you wish it, in honour of your mother's marriage, after which I will give you £10 for your journey and other contingent expenses, and permit you to employ such tradesmen at Oxford as I shall point out, for such necessaries as it is proper I should furnish you with. Their bills must be forwarded to Mr. Corbold, who, for the present, I shall probably continue as my agent, and when I have duly examined them, they shall be paid. Your college expenses I shall also order to be transmitted to him, and through him to me. I must now dismiss you, for I have letters to write. Be careful in passing these windows, if you please not to approach them too closely. This room is a favourite apartment of mine, and I must not be interrupted or annoyed in it in any way. Remember this, if you please. Good morning." During the whole of this very trying interview, Mowbray had not uttered a single word. He knew that if he opened his lips, the indignation that burned at his heart would burst forth with a vehemence he should no longer be able to control. He felt his heart throb, and every pulse so fiercely keeping time to it, that he was terrified at himself, and fearful lest the tide of passion that worked thus fearfully within him should drive him to do, or even to say, what he might repent. He hastened from the room, leaving Mr. Cartwright very comfortably persuaded that the eloquence which had been bestowed on him, if it sometimes failed in converting those who had heard him to his doctrine, was of a nature well calculated to enforce his authority, a species of success which perhaps satisfied him better still. The unfortunate Charles took refuge in Helen's dressing room from the storm that raged in his bosom. He longed to hear the gentle voice of his sister with as much eagerness as one panting in fever longs for a cool breeze or a refreshing stream; and when he entered the room and found it unoccupied, he felt as if that misfortune were greater than all which had fallen upon him before. In a state of the most pitiable depression of spirits, he seated himself most forlornly in a chaise longue that stood in a recess as far as possible from the windows, and there, resting his head on the side of it, and covering his face with his hands, he remained for a considerable time perfectly immovable, and quite as miserable as his worst enemy could wish. At length the door opened, and a female entered. Charles sprang forward to meet her, and very narrowly escaped encircling Miss Torrington in his arms. She drew back, certainly, but hardly with so sudden a movement as that of Mowbray, who, colouring and stammering in extreme confusion, said, as he retreated to his former place, "I beg your pardon, I came here to look for Helen." "And so did I, Mr. Mowbray. I cannot think where she has hid herself. But you do not look like yourself, Charles. Has Mr. Cartwright been speaking to you? I heard him tell his wife that he had desired you to meet him in the library." "In his library, Miss Torrington. Pray call it as he does, his library. But what a fool am I to care thus for a word! It is his library, the man says right. But what then is poor Helen? What is Fanny? What am I?" His features expressed such terrible agony of mind, that Rosalind almost felt afraid to leave him, and stood at some distance from him as he sat, with her looks riveted upon his face, and her eyes overflowing with tears. "Tell me, my dear Charles," she said, "what is it that has happened to you? I will go and seek Helen and bring her to you in a moment. Only tell me before I go if any new thing has happened to make us all more miserable than we were. Is it not common cause, Mr. Mowbray? For heaven's sake, tell me what has befallen you." "It is not common cause, Miss Torrington," he replied with bitterness. "My situation is, I heartily hope, without parallel; and as none can share my wretchedness, as none can relieve it, it were better, I believe, that none should know it." "That is not the language of friendship, Mr. Mowbray. Were poor Helen here, I trust you would not answer her inquiries so harshly." "Harshly? If so, I have been very wrong. Forgive me. Could you have heard the language this man held to me? Could you have seen him enthroned in my poor father's library, and heard him tell me that when I passed before the windows I must take care not to approach too nearly? Oh, Rosalind! Could you have heard all this, you would not wonder if I answered even madly to any question asked." Rosalind stood silently before him when he had ceased to speak, her hands tightly clasped, and her eyes riveted on the ground. "I will ask you but one question more," she said after a long pause. "And what is that, Miss Torrington?" "Miss Torrington!" she said, muttering between her teeth. "Alas! how madly have I acted, and how difficult it is to retrace a wrong step once taken!" She trembled violently, so violently that she was obliged to support herself by leaning on the back of a chair which stood near her. Charles Mowbray's head again rested on the sofa, and his eyes were hid from her. She felt that he saw her not, and this perhaps it was which gave her courage to proceed in the task she had determined to perform. But her breast heaved almost convulsively, and her mouth became so parched that it was with difficulty she could articulate these words. "I learned from Sir Gilbert Harrington, Mr. Mowbray, that I have the power of making him my guardian." "Thank Heaven!" exclaimed Charles, interrupting her. "I thank Heaven for it, Miss Torrington. You may then escape, and immediately, from this place of torment. This will indeed help me to bear it better." He spoke the last words more composedly, but again buried his face on the sofa. "But think you, Mr. Mowbray, I would leave Helen here?" "I fear you would have no power to take her," he replied. "Not I, but you. Oh, Mr. Mowbray! Charles, Charles, will you not understand me? Will you spare me this agony? No, you will not, but I have deserved it all, and I will bear it. Charles Mowbray, it is I who would now lay my fortune at your feet. Oh, do not answer me as I once answered you. Charles Mowbray, will you take me for your wife?" "No, by Heaven!" he exclaimed, falling on his knees before her. "Poor Rosalind! Dear, generous, devoted friend! And for her sake, then, for my dear Helen's sake, you would submit to be my wife? My wife! An outcast, penniless, insulted beggar? No, Rosalind, by Heaven, no! I would rather perish in the lowest state of human wretchedness than so abuse your noble nature. But do me justice, noble Rosalind. Let there on one point at least be some equality between us. Believe that I love you, and that with a strength of passion of which, as I think, your unawakened heart has yet no power to judge. But should you, Rosalind, ever learn what it is to love, then do me justice, and know how dear was honour to my soul when I adored but could refuse you." He seized her dress and pressed it to his lips, and then rising from his knees, he darted out of the room without daring to trust his eyes to look at her. Had Mowbray's state of mind been somewhat less miserable, had the buoyant spirit given to him by nature been less completely crushed by the galling interview of the morning, it is probable that his memory might have suggested to him some circumstance in the hours passed heretofore with Rosalind, which might have raised some blessed hope upon his mind as to the motive and feelings that had led her to act as she had done. But, as it was, no such light from heaven fell upon him. In simplest sincerity he believed that she had rejected his suit because she did not love him, and that she had now offered to become his wife solely for Helen's sake, and in the generous hope of saving her by giving to him the power of offering her a home. With this conviction, he determined to spare her the embarrassment and himself the torture of meeting again. With all the feverish hurry of impatient suffering, he instantly sought his mother, informed her of Mr. Cartwright's wish that he should return to Oxford, and of his own desire to comply with this immediately. There was something in the suddenness of this unresisting obedience that seemed to startle her. She applauded his resolution, but seemed to wish that, for some time at least, he should delay the execution of it. But on this point he was immovable, and as Mr. Cartwright appeared well pleased that so it should be, he succeeded in so hastening the arrangements for his departure that within 24 hours he had left the house, and that without having again seen Rosalind. The greater part of this interval, indeed, was passed at Oakley, where his reiterated assurances that he should be much, very much happier at Oxford than at home, were accepted in excuse for the suddenness of his departure. Sir Gilbert, indeed, had so well read Rosalind's heart, and so confidently did he anticipate his speedy and even triumphant return, that both himself and his lady, who as usual was wholly in his confidence, saw him depart without regret, and uttered their farewells with a cheerfulness that grated sadly on the feelings of the poor exile. End of Chapter 3.